Welcome to the Grounded Guidance Podcast, where we explore the transformative potential of living in alignment with our intuition. I'm your host, Karen Williams. Each day we receive countless intuitive messages that guide us on our journey toward a more fulfilling life. Are you listening? Through personal experiences, ongoing self-reflection, and captivating stories, we will explore the wisdom of individuals who have embraced the magic of following their intuition and fearlessly sharing their light with the world. These conversations are designed to meet you exactly where you are, serving as a gentle push from the universe to join us on this enlightening journey. Okay, welcome everybody to the Grounded Guidance Podcast, where today I have the pleasure of welcoming Nicole Majik. Nicole is a renowned psychic medium with supernatural abilities like reading auras and energy stemming back to her early childhood. She is a remarkable individual with a diverse background in the sciences of all things. She has a bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry and a master's degree in metaphysics. She is an accomplished leader and educator and created a highly effective life-transforming empowerment program called The Alchemy of Transformation, where she guides individuals in awakening to their true potential by erasing limiting beliefs and empowering them to live a life they truly deserve. What makes Nicole's perspective so unique is her personal journey. She's had not one, but two near-death experiences, which she's going to talk about today, which have completely transformed her outlook on life and changed how she shows up in the world. It has allowed her to navigate adversity and transform obstacles into opportunities. And I'm sure that's just the tip of the iceberg. So welcome, Nicole.
Thank you, Karen. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so let's jump into the near-death experiences. I know that the one you had early on, you made a quantum leap kind of in time and really changed a lot about your life and how you show up. So let's start there and then we'll just see where the journey takes us.
Right. Well, that one was back in 2006. And I was working in chemistry at the time, and I was working up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I had a good hour commute without traffic. And I ended up leaving work a little bit late that particular day. So I was going to get stuck in the rush hour traffic because I usually went in a little bit earlier to get out earlier so I could be home in a reasonable amount of time. Being in that rush hour traffic probably puts me, about an hour and a half away. And what was going on was I was in the high speed lane and the traffic was going maybe about 30 miles an hour. So it was just kind of moving along. But then I could see up ahead that there was a car smoking down in the ditch on the right and another car down with that other car as well. So a lot of people were, what we say around here is rubbernecking, right? Like looking and watching and seeing the show that's going on off the road. And all of a sudden, my attention was put to the other side of the highway. And with that, everything slowed down. So it was almost like this frame by frame experience of seeing this woman, and I could see all these little details. Like I could even see her hair shimmering, like the light that was shining off of individual hairs on her head. She had this beautiful black curly hair. She was swaying with her head down, so I couldn't see her face. So she was swaying with the impact of what I noticed on her driver's side door. And that was kind of pushed in because obviously she was hit. So even though everything was moving at such a slow speed, I ended up thinking in my head very quickly all of the things. I could process information. It was like my brain was on warp drive, and yet everything else around me was in almost like frame by frame motion, slow motion. And when I was wondering what was actually happening with this woman in her car and who hit her and where's this other car, then it felt like my head was moved to see, oh, you want the answer to that? That's the car that's going to be landing right in your lap. And when I took a look at the guy that was in it, his face was all contorted because he was screaming in terror. and our eyes kind of locked for a split second. And when that happened, I realized, oh my God, this guy is going to land right in my lap, right where my steering wheel is. His car is going to move over and land on my car and like crunch like head, like top to top. That point, it was going to snap my neck and I was going to die.
So you're
So
getting a play-by-play of this before it happens.
yeah, either that or that's what was happening at the time. Like it was almost like you couldn't differentiate what was really happening because that's what I saw happening. So I don't know, looking back, if that actually happened in that dimension at that particular time. So because when that happened, right after, I had this experience where I met all of my members of my family, my immediate family, and I sat down with each one, had this whole conversation with them, and then said goodbye to each one individually. And when that was done, I said, okay, I'm ready. And when I said, okay, I'm ready, this peace and this love just flooded everything of my being, and everything went black. And once everything went black, I felt like I was projected forward like a pinball in a pinball machine, is how I describe it. Is that initial just from 0 to 60, and I went through the tunnel and all of that stuff. So I was seeing all kinds of things. And then when I came to, I was holding onto my steering wheel, and it was like if you are underwater for an extended period of time and you're at that point where you can't breathe and your body is just like going into this convulsive state. I came to and I just went like gasp as much air as I could get in, and then all of a sudden my consciousness came back to, and I realized I didn't know where I was. So I looked around at where I was because I was actually driving past a bridge, or under a bridge, I should say, on the highway. And I'm looking around, there's no cars on this highway during rush hour traffic on the Massachusetts Turnpike, which is still where I was at. I was at a different location on it, but it's still all the way home would be the same exact thing. Just bumper to bumper, slow going. There was no cars before me, no cars behind me, no cars on the other side. And I just remembered after that gasp just being, oh my God, I almost just died. And then I looked in my rear view and I'm like, oh my God, I should have been dead. And then realizing there's no cars on the road, I was asking myself, oh my God, am I dead? Like, as I see this one lone car coming up on the other side of the highway. And my joke is, okay, was I on the highway to hell or the highway to heaven? Where am I? Am I like, what is happening? So oddly enough, my instinctual reaction was to call my mom. And when I called her up, she just immediately answered the phone and was in this frantic, oh my God, Nikki, are you okay? I was just praying for you. I usually pray for you in the morning. And, I just had this really sense. I already prayed for you today, but, I just felt like you needed some protection and blah, blah, blah. And she's going off. And I just kept, Mom, like, can you just shut up for a minute? Because I'm so confused right now. I'm like, I think I'm dead. Am I dead? And she's like, what? No, you're talking to me on the phone. What are you talking about? So I told her what happened. And she said, oh, you rode angel wings. And I just remembered saying, or wormhole or something. Like, I definitely rode through something. And I don't care what it was, but it was very intense. This is kind of the point in my story where I like to back up a little bit, because at that point in my life, I was so depressed. I had gone through some postpartum depression that kind of spiraled into a deeper depression, and I didn't even know. So how that sneaks up on you and gets to be to the point that it can be is definitely a thing. So people who don't understand it, never went through it, you may never understand it, but it does happen. And I just remembered being so depressed and obsessed with death. I wanted to die, and in my mind, I don't know if anybody has ever watched that show 1000 Ways to Die, but it was a great weird show that showed all these weird things of how people have died just very oddly. And so I used to kind of think about all these things and how I could die at any given moment of of the day. But because I had these three small children, I also was in this place where I would fantasize about the deaths, and then I would go right into my mantra of, okay, but these kids need you, so just hold on a little longer. And I've used that mantra all day long, every single day, and it was probably a good year before the near death experience happened that I was in that space. And when this happened, it erased everything. It's like it erased all the depression and replaced it with this love and fervor for life, a curiosity for life, wanting to help, wanting to make more of an impact, and I really feel like that love vibration that takes over, because love is healing energy, that it definitely rips through you and creates like a healing effect in your body. So when you come back from that, you can't help but be changed one way or another. So when I came back, one of my kids used to meet me at the door all the time. So my second son, it was like 2 days before his birthday. And I just grabbed that kid and hugged him. Was like, oh my God, I love you. 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 And I just couldn't stop like sharing that love with my kids and everything. And my husband, my ex now, but my husband at the time, he was like, oh, you're exaggerating and you're making this up. And anybody that knows me, I try to be to the T, as accurate as possible. And being an analytical chemist, that's part of, it kind of has to be part of your personality to be in that space.
Right.
So it was one of those things where it doesn't matter what you think right now, this is something that's happening. And even though that was this amazing experience, it's everything that's happened after that point. Because as awesome and interesting, oh, and I should say this, I looked at where I was, and when I drove home from work another day, I mapped out the difference between where the incident happened and where I ended up when I came to and gasping for air. It was 2.5 miles away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That there's really no explanation for that, is there?
Nope. Because
I
yeah.
Oh no, yeah, go
No.
ahead.
No, there wasn't. And that was like the biggest thing, was how the heck did I end up all the way over here? 2.5 miles is quite a ways away, and especially ending up with no no cars before you and behind you, or even on the road at all. It didn't make any sense. This was rush hour on a Massachusetts turnpike. This is like bumper to bumper space every single day at that time.
Okay, so I have a few questions,
Yes.
obviously. So the woman with the black hair, obviously it sounds like you were moving in between time and space dimensions as you were having this near death experience. The woman with the dark hair, how have you identified who she is now, and after you reflect back on that near death experience? Who do you believe she is?
She
Curious.
is the person who was going to land on my car. That
Okay.
guy hit her and ended up bouncing off of her car and went up over the Jersey barrier.
Okay, so you were getting a flash forward of who she was. Okay.
I think I
Okay.
was getting a flash at that moment because she was already hit.
Hmm.
That other car was already up in the air over the Jersey barrier. And I was just seeing the still frame by frame of like maybe half of a second of what was going on before I asked, where is this person that hit her car? And then it was directed to this guy. And again, it was like, because it was a frame by frame, what would normally take less than a second, it felt like 5 minutes.
Wow. So when you had what sounds like when you physically woke, when you had the gasp, you physically looked around, was the reality that you experienced that there were no cars around, or was that within still within another dimension? Am I
Well,
asking
that's a
that
good
correctly?
question. I
Yeah.
mean, physically, there were no cars. From my reality in that moment, there were no cars before me, behind me,
Wow.
and that was for a while.
Wow. So during this time, do you have any idea how much time was elapsed from when the point of impact to when you were gasping? I would call that maybe the time
No,
frame. No.
I don't have that.
So do you have any idea of your awareness of your physicality? Were you aware that you were in a body at that time?
After the gasp,
Wow.
before, and I was aware of that when I looked at the guy, and right before I had the vision of what was going to happen and I was going to die, I had physical consciousness of being in a body. As soon as I acknowledged that I was seeing what was going to happen and transitioning into having those conversations with family members and saying goodbye,
Mm.
that's where there was, some kind of unraveling or disconnect or in the consciousness space.
You know what's so interesting about that is when you think about sitting down with all of your family members and having these conversations with them, right? That takes time. And
Right.
you know that in this, I'm not exactly sure what happened in the accident, but this serious accident was at a snapshot in time. And it happened very fast, but everything got slowed way, way, way down. How do you reason with that? I mean, how do you make sense of that when you're trying to unravel, oh, I had a conversation with this person, that person, and I had this, wonderful feeling of peace that came over me. It's hard to understand that.
It can
Um,
be very hard to understand that.
yeah.
Absolutely.
It,
And it's it's ineffable. You can't describe
mm,
the whole entire thing because none of it makes logical sense if you are applying our 3D
yeah.
idea of time and space into that. Um, but if you look at it in that quantum realm of there is no time, you can have a whole conversation and a minuscule of a second go by. Because our conversation could end up being, 5 or 10 minutes, but that 5 or 10 minutes, everything's collapsed because there's no time. So that could just happen like this.
Were you aware of the quantum field and the quantum reality before your near death experience?
Yes. So especially being a scientist, I loved different like string theories and just quantum physics and all different kinds of things and all the metaphysical worlds. If you look at the metaphysics end of things, it's where the science and spiritual kind of collide,
Hmm.
and
Yes.
it become that's quantum physics. And the quantum physics is, it's almost like the more you learn, then all of a sudden you get to this place where you're like, oh my God, I understand, I understand, I understand. And then something, you get to this one point where it convolutes itself, and then you realize, oh my God, I know nothing.
So your experiences, let's take a step back to when you were a kid and seeing auras and reading energy. Did your experience kind of with the supernatural propel you into the field of science to really have a better understanding of what's happening? Or was that kind of a separate interest?
I think so. I'll describe a few different things because there's I could see auras and energy all my life and spirits. Think I was 5 years old when my grandfather had passed away. This is always a fun story to tell because I was very connected with my aunt and uncle. They were my godparents and their dog. And it was kind of like my dog. And when my grandfather passed away, it was my aunt that got the call. So in the morning, I'm just going to kind of skip over some things and then I'll back up. We'll Pulp Fiction this a little bit. Um, in the morning, my older sister, she was 5.5 years older than me. So, you know, I'm the little one and I don't know anything. So she had come in and told me that my grandfather died in the night. And I said, yeah, I know. And I was just playing with something or doing something. And she's like, wait, how do you know? And I said, Sheba told me. That's my aunt's dog. And she's like, Sheba told you? Really? And I was like, yeah. And I just went like very nonchalant and just matter of fact, keep going. And then it turned into, Mom, Nikki's lying and making stuff up. But really, it was, I had a very telepathic communication between the dog and also my aunt and uncle. And if I fast forward to, in my adulthood, I actually asked about this, is what really happened that night. And my aunt had told me when I got the phone call, I was at the phone and your uncle was standing right next to me and Sheba was right at my feet looking at me on the phone. So I feel like when we're really super connected, like the energy and the information just gets transferred and whoever's picking up on that can be picking up on that. I was very active in the night astrally and intuitively, and I've been like that my whole life. That sometimes I'll wake up and I know that I went and did all kinds of work in that astral space.
Yeah, that's amazing. That I too do a lot of work at night in the astral realm, and I believe anybody has access to it. There is I kind of see it like an information superhighway where it's a flow of consciousness that anybody can tap into. It's really, really neat that you describe it that way. You said when you called your mom during the NDE, sorry, it was probably when you came back out of into your physical consciousness. She said something about angels. Do you think your mom was tapped into that realm of consciousness where she was feeling that something had happened to you?
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. My whole family is very intuitive, and
Wow.
it just so happens that for whatever reason, I was the one that was kind of demonized, and everybody else's gift came from God, and somehow mine didn't. I don't know.
Wow. Has that been since your near-death experience that it's been portrayed that way?
No, but I think it's because that was all through my life
Mm.
where I wasn't supposed to talk about things. I knew things that other people didn't know or I shouldn't know or whatever. And I think it just freaked people out because it didn't fit into a particular category in the Catholic or Christian religion. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with those religions. I don't think there is. Is your faith is your faith. I think that when we tap into the energy of spirituality and religion, there are rules that get put into place for it to become a religion. And then there's the spirituality of it. And the spirituality are the fundamentals of what make up a religion on the universal realm. Which is why so many religions have the same exact thing, the same exact message. the same exact, stories of prophets and things like that too, and healers. So if we just kind of look at it in a different way, it's what perspective are you looking at something from? It's, that whole put people at three different parts of the elephant, you're going to get a different description of that elephant, but it's still the elephant.
Do you feel like your path through spirituality, and I'm not sure if you had a deep religious upbringing, do you feel like your path through spirituality, contributed to the demonization of your gifts? Or, yeah, I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think when I look back, I have what they call a golden brain, where I can see things from all different angles, because I don't operate necessarily from a right or left brain. It's smack in the middle. And all these different things that I was involved in growing up, when in elementary school all the way up to high school, I was put in all these advanced placement programs. I was put into, they called it back then, which is so unpolitically correct, but it was the Gifted Children
Gifted. Sure. Yes.
program, right?
I remember that. Yes.
And it kind of was
It's
this
a horrible
weird thing.
connotation if you think about it. Yeah.
It is. And
Mhm.
I've written about, like, reflecting back on that stuff. There were so many things that we went through. And I feel like that there were a lot of tests, and it was a government program too. So, I mean, we could go down that rabbit hole, but there's so many different things that would happen, and it was almost like we were such guinea pigs. Yeah. On many different levels,
Yeah,
on
right.
social, mental, emotional, spiritual, intuitive,
Okay,
all of that.
I'm curious enough. I'm curious what you think was happening. You
With the
said
gifted
you said
program.
like that this is a government funded program.
Yeah.
What do you think was happening?
Well, they took people with, certain levels of testing, because I remembered seeing results of all these different tests. I mean, we were tested more than anyone else was, and with those standardized tests. And
Mhm.
I remembered seeing results of those tests and being in the top 1% across the nation.
Wow.
And then also the brain, um, like the brain testing that they did. I remembered looking at the results and seeing, that mine was right in the middle. And I thought it was so boring, because other people had, like, on the left, on the right, a little bit more towards the front, a little bit more towards the back. Not me. I was always smack dab in the middle. And I just
So when
remember
you
being
say
like,
that, you not more left brain or right brain, you're gifted in both sides of the brain.
yeah.
Am
And
I
it
saying that
was,
right?
yeah. And that's what they call the golden brain. I
Wow.
didn't know that there was actually like a name for it until a few years ago, when somebody said that to me. Oh, that's a golden brain. Because I was just kind of talking about it just
Mhm.
as a matter of fact, like, this is what happened when I was growing up. And if what I realized in one of the classes that I was teaching about intuition and activating your
Mhm.
intuition, when I was showing a picture of the pineal gland, I was like, oh, there it is. That's exactly where all my brain tests came up, is like smack in the middle, right where the pineal is. So I
Oh,
just started
wow.
laughing
Yeah,
in the
it
middle
does.
of
It
this
sits
class.
it sits at
Yeah.
the base of the was it the corpus callosum right there in right between the two hemispheres, right?
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
no. Maybe it
It's
doesn't.
it's right, like, literally smack in the middle this
Wow.
way, and like in the middle
That's
of
an
your brain.
interesting correlation that you made. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was while I was teaching an intuition activating class, and I was like, oh. And I just started laughing, and I had to tell the story about, the left right brain and how boring I thought I was, and really, I guess all along maybe I was just operating out of my intuition all along.
Wow.
But I can see things from multiple angles. So when I ask a lot of questions, is to
Mhm.
understand where somebody's coming from, because I can see it from all the different perspectives. So I get very
Wow.
curious as to which perspective somebody's coming from. And that
Wow, that's
also allows
amazing.
me, to talk to somebody and articulate what I actually mean to that person so that they can understand.
Wow, I've got a lot of questions. Are you able to see that when your background in science? Do you, since science is generally black and white, are you able to see another perspective, another another the
Layer,
unknown, the realm that we don't
the gray
see in
area.
science? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, because when you look at the quantum physics of it,
Yeah,
there's always this gray area.
there is.
And so there are these there are, you know, theories and things like that, but then there are the formulas and everything. But when you look at the quantum space, there's so many layers that make up reality, and
Right.
we only tap into a small piece of what reality is. It's very we make it black and white. We live in a very
We
dualistic
do.
world, and the thing is that if we look at it a little bit more like this, if we've got black and white and then we've got every shade of gray in between, there is no real black and white. And at what point does something go from white to gray and black to gray? And if everything has both sides, then how can we say we're only on one side versus another? We are everything. We're all inclusive of that duality because we're the only ones that make something right or wrong.
So it's our own limiting perceptions that perceive that it's black or white.
Yeah, because it's just like hot and cold. At what point does something become not hot and becomes cold, or not cold and becomes hot? What is warm? Is it hot or cold? So our person, a lot of people act like they want to be so positive, right? I'm so positive and stay focused on the positive. Yes, it's great to stay focused on the positive, but you can't only be positive because we experience feelings and emotions that are all encompassing, and that's okay. It's okay for us to feel sad, angry. It's okay for us to have a thought that might be like bizarrely maybe it's violent, I don't know. As if you're not acting on that, like, you have no control over your thoughts or your emotions in a charged moment.
Right.
You only have that control over your body and what you do with that. And you're allowed to feel sad so you can process through. You're allowed to feel angry because you're meant to process through those things. Afraid to process through. Why are you afraid? So all these different emotions that are negative, they're not necessarily negative. It's just an alert system. All it is energy to give you information for you to process something so that you can grow from it. And that's what people don't really understand to that level when they become toxic positive. You're supposed to be positive all the time. No, you're not.
Right. Right.
Who says?
How, that, yeah. How do you help somebody separate? Okay, I'm having a feeling. This is a feeling. It's a neutral feeling. I don't have to put any association whether it makes me angry or not, right? We get so enmeshed in our feelings about things that then create these patterns that move us towards, well, I'm mad about this, or I'm angry about this, or I'm happy about that, or I'm waking up today and today's going to be a great day. How do we shift that?
Shift that perspective. Where I usually start is, I love to look at what people really want in their lives. So I help people define their desires.
Mm.
When it comes to the emotional stuff, usually when we're processing through what it is that we want,
Mhm.
We know what we don't want, and we're not always sure about what we do want. So, in looking at what you do want, you want to check with, how you identify yourself and what your values are. In that, usually we start seeing like gaps in what you've created in reality and who you want to become. And you're going to have emotions that come up depending on different things that happen in your life of what you like and what you don't like, what you want and what you don't want. So we're kind of like pressing buttons to see where things are, because if you're upset about my life is this way versus that way, we want to look at what is it that you're upset about, because anger is about what needs to be changed. What is it that you might be grieving or sad about, because that's all about what needs to be processed and let go. And then we like to look at what you're fearful around. Where are those worries? Because that's all about what needs to be acknowledged. And when we're looking at these different fears, it's facing those fears in a way which says, okay, well, what emotion are you feeling and where are you feeling it in your body? Because that's really going to tell you a whole multitude of information to then start asking the right questions to see, where do these things come from? Because they're all embedded in your belief system up here in your brain. And that plays out as a thought and a feeling, which is a mediator to the behavior that you elicit because of that belief. So the belief is triggered, and then the thought and the feeling are a resulting and mediary process point to that trigger, which then you act a certain way because of.
Wow.
And that's what creates the reality and the self-sabotage.
Yeah,
So
I
I
find
help
that.
people,
Oh, go
sorry,
ahead. I'm sorry.
I help people to then take a look at that and then see what would they like to do differently? Who would they rather show up as? And then we can erase the belief and install a new belief that promotes that. All the while also tackling it from the other angle of what are the coping mechanisms that you would need to use in different situations that may arise and players in those potential situations, and then how to become more aware and then get into the space where you actually change that behavior. So there's a few ways that we can work to make it happen as quickly as possible, especially even if we're working on certain beliefs that we're removing and replacing and reframing, to make sure that you can have the coping mechanisms and the techniques to utilize for other beliefs that we may not be working on just yet. And so that's where the golden brain comes into play, where I've devised the alchemy of transformation process that helps tackle it from all the different angles, so it actually amplifies and reduces the time frame in which to move you into that transformation.
I have so many questions. Do you find that when you're helping people through that transformational process, we all have so many layers of trauma, and trauma shows up in our bodies in so many different ways.
Mm-hmm.
The somatic process of dealing with trauma, identifying the root cause, right, of that emotion and how it's manifested in the body. Do you find that moving right towards that piece in the where it's stored in the body moves towards a quicker transformation than what I'm kind of going all over the board here, but what would be considered like traditional talk therapy, right? Oh, let's talk about your emotions. But really somatically, where are you feeling it in your body? And then
Yeah.
unpacking what the belief is and what the emotion is and what.
Yeah, I think
Am I asking that
there are
right?
different layers that need to be looked
Yeah.
at, and that is definitely one useful one, because looking at where it is in your body, we store these traumas in our DNA, and some of them. So I'm going to peel back a few layers. So there's like about three things that we want to look at when it comes to this. Is we've got the beliefs in there. So whatever the root cause is of those beliefs, you've assigned meaning to certain things that have happened to you and then stored that in your cells. So that's going to play out a certain way. And because you've gone into a subconscious behavioral pattern and it's locked into the DNA, even when you switch gears and change your mind, like we could change the belief, and that's good, and that'll start to begin a new behavior. But what people don't realize, and this is where I've seen clients go into this space of wanting to give up, and especially when they come to me after working with other people that started the process but didn't quite get them over that hump,
Yes.
is because they didn't talk about how the body follows the mind. If you think about when you do something over and over and over again, just like military or martial arts or any other thing that you are doing over and over and repeated, and you have muscle memory. This is what happens with your beliefs and your behaviors. You have this muscle memory. So even though you have changed your mind and committed to doing something different, and you might be so excited about it, and you want to do it, and this is good for you or good for your business, good for your family, and you go to do it and you realize, I don't want to do anything. And you have this resistance that's within your body. You're all of a sudden exhausted. You need a nap, all of these things. Guess what? This is your body revolting because it's saying, we don't do this.
Right.
We don't know about this. This is dangerous for us. So your mind may be able to shift, but your body has to follow. So you've got to understand what that entails is you've got to give your body the grace and then not give up on it and then give in to the old pattern again.
Right.
Because if you're reinforcing an old belief that you can't do something and you haven't like even attempted because you're not giving yourself the grace to shift from changing from the mind, you got to let the body catch up and say, okay, this is happening, we're doing this thing, but I'm also going to give you some time to like rest and recuperate.
I
So
think
there's
that,
that.
oh yeah, keep going.
Yeah,
Yes.
so there's
Yes.
that piece.
Mhm.
So that's part of the beliefs, and then recognizing that the body has to follow after you've trained the mind to change, because the subconscious pattern needs to be ingrained in the body. Now, the other level of this is there may be emotions that are stored up epigenetically, which
Mhm.
means when your ancestors have passed down beliefs and emotions that get locked into your DNA, your body, because you've learned them from whomever, your
Right.
parents, their parents, their parents' parents, all that stuff. And what I've noticed too is that there may be something that is somebody else's belief, and you don't hold that 100% true as your belief, but the emotion is still locked in to your body.
Yes.
Those are a lot easier to release because it's almost like once you have this acknowledgement, you can say, oh, I know where that came from, and that's not mine, so you disown it.
Hmm.
And that can be very easy to shift out of. Whereas sometimes the beliefs, if you've owned the belief or if you've owned a portion of the belief, you can then lock that at a deeper level that has more tentacles, I like to say.
Yeah. I love this work. I love the work of epigenetics and repatterning and releasing the beliefs that are stored within our DNA. Um, how do how how do you help people identify what those patterns may be? I mean, it from my own experience, they are so deeply woven in that I can't even recognize that it's through me, but not of me. It's been passed down, like the epigenetic piece. It's been passed down. If it's a belief structure, I can usually identify that faster. Um, but it's sometimes it feels like I'm just dealing with this like tightly woven braid that I know if I can just like cut it or release it, it just feels so freeing.
Yeah. To all the ladies out there, I'm gonna say I usually use the visual on when you were a little girl and you had a few of these little tiny chain necklaces, and when you
Mhm.
put them in your jewelry box and they get all tangled up for whatever reason, and you go to try to pull them apart and there's just knots after knots after knots. It's almost like you have to be very delicate and have the
Yeah.
patience to start pulling them apart, but they're so stuck together. But as you put that time and a little bit of effort into it, all of a sudden they start to unravel until they're all coming apart. And it becomes very easy, but it's almost that initial, um, you need to have that catalyst and make it past the threshold to get
Yes.
there. And
Yes.
that's really where the tackling it from all the different angles comes into play, because it makes it a lot easier when people start realizing things and then they
Yeah.
start seeing the results. And especially when it's happening where, you can hoist somebody up, or you can have 5 people hoist you up.
Right. Yes.
And it's a lot easier for 5 people to hoist somebody up. So if you have the support angles, and you're supporting yourself, that's really what it comes down to, is you're implementing the things that support you in the most highly probable fashion for your results and
Mm.
your success. So it's compounded instead of you're looking at one thing, because most people don't operate from only do this and it's going to
Right.
work for you,
Right.
right? So
They
if
don't.
it's
Yeah.
kind of like great for all the people that can do a keto diet, but
Right.
that may not be for everyone. There may be, oh, you can eat some of these things like this and and I love vegetarian meals, but I'm not a full vegetarian,
Mm-hmm.
right? I
Yes.
have to have certain proteins and things like that. So, or I enjoy them too. So it's not even about restricting yourself. The more resistance you give yourself,
Mm-hmm.
the more you're going to create for yourself.
Mm.
So where there is resistance, there is pain. If you think about the body, where there's resistance, you're going to have pain in the body, whether it's the stress in your shoulders, in your back where the scaps are, or a joint or whatever. If you look at the epigenetics of things, a lot of those things carry down from the beliefs that you hold.
Wow.
I mean, we can go down a huge
Yes,
rabbit
I
hole on
love
that
this.
one.
Let's do another
Huge.
episode, Nicole. Because
Yeah, right?
I love that. I really, yes, I really do believe our ability to move through our own trauma, whether it's intergenerational trauma or the trauma we face in this lifetime, begins by facing those shadows that all of us have. And so many of us are resistant to working through what those patterns are because we just simply don't have the tools or the resources. So um, I definitely want to chat with you again about that. But thank you for that small little snippet, because I think it's where we have to go to help elevate the vibration on this planet. We have to have some awareness of where our own blind spots are. And we have to do that by facing some of these pieces. So I want to get back to the NDE and then your second NDE, near death experience, for those of you that may not know what I'm referencing. So I'm curious about the typical hover above your body, white light thing. Did you have that experience in either NDE where you could peer back and look at your body there, say in the car, or have the white light in you said something about the tunnel. Were those
So
experiences for you?
I had that experience at a different point when I had a tire blowout and I
Mm.
spun out of control. Uh, that's instead of everything slowing down, everything seemed to have sped up, but I was outside of my body watching what was happening above. So there was an instance of that, and my and I've astral projected enough times where I could see my body. So when I had those near death experiences, it was more of a full consciousness experience, like
Yeah.
not being conscious of body, but being conscious of mind or spirit or whatever, the collective, or however you want to put it. It's just like this data. There's so much data.
Yes. So when you, okay, so I'm curious about that. If you saw the body and it moved quicker, but your first near death experience moves slower, how do you, I'm curious from your scientific mind and from your near death experience perspective, how do you define consciousness since your near death experience? Like what does it mean? What does consciousness look like or mean from that golden brain perspective, I guess I should say?
Yeah, it feels a lot more like just like the computer. There's a grid of information, and you're tapping into different elements of that grid at any given time. And where the fulcrums meet, there's an experience of multiple things that can happen. That's what I feel like. There's so much data, and there's so many like dimensional aspects. If you think about all of the things that got you to a point,
Mm-hmm.
um, for example, being introduced to my current boyfriend, it was a a mutual friend said, I got a message saying, "Hey, tell me what you think about my friend so and so," and he got the same thing. "Hey, I wanted to introduce you to my friend Nicole," and both of us were like, "No, absolutely not. I'm good. Like I don't want to meet anybody. There's too much going on in my life right now, and too
Mm-hmm.
much shifting, and don't need this BS." Even. And it's the funny thing is that we're both saying the same exact thing from a different angle. And then I was kind of like, well, you know what? I haven't met your new girlfriend, so I'll go out as friends, but you don't be pushing me into, anything relationship wise with anyone, please. Thank you. And then it was just having a good time with friends and hitting it off with this person who, and this is where it comes in, is all the decisions that you make is, I could have said absolutely not, blocking you. I'm not answering your messages anymore. He could have said the same thing. We could have said, no, not this time, and, moving on. We both agreed to go and just go have fun as friends. I know he had told me that, he left. He got to the place and then he left, but then decided to turn around and come back. I sat down in my car in the parking lot when I got there, realizing that I tried to make it so that I wasn't the first one there, and then I ended up being the first one there. And I'm like, where is everybody? You guys told me, like, what are you talking about? You tell me this time and you're not here. So I actually thought about, should I leave? So many things. So if you think about all of the decisions that not just you make, but everyone else in a situation makes to get there, there's so many things that could happen. If one person decides to make a different decision, it changes everything.
Well, and when you explain consciousness like it's a big data warehouse, there's just a bunch of data there, right? Everything has to be input just correctly, right?
Yeah.
This is where we talk about synchronicities and working within this quantum field. It really is amazing when you think about how things happen and come together
Yeah.
and our experiences. And I don't want to steal your limelight, but I just had to say that because you're right. When you really
Yeah.
think about
I mean, it's
your
all
desire
math.
for not wanting to meet and his desire for not wanting to meet in different points in your life and him wanting to leave the restaurant. I mean, there's a lot that has to happen for it to all congeal.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to that whole data dump, I know that we don't have a lot of time to talk about the second NDE, but I can say this is that at the point of time where Sorry, there are people moving in my house. At the point in time where, after a whole bunch of stuff happened, I was in this space of I call it the light burst. So I always referred to it as this light burst. I was in this space where it was almost like I was in it at the same time as I was seeing it from a different point of view. So it was both associated and dissociated views. And when I was in that space, it was so much energy and so much information was downloading. It was like if I were to hold a picture book, Karen, and just flip through it super fast, you would get pieces of images. You wouldn't get full images, but you'd get enough where you'd have flashes of certain things that you could kind of hang on to. So that's what happened is I had a whole bunch of information that I know come into play. There's a number of years for this. There's this piece of November to February, which is playing out, and I just figured out what I think it means right now. And so it's almost like when something starts to happen, another piece unlocks and the rest of the information comes out. There will be times where I'll be realizing something. I see the light burst and something's coming out of my mouth before I even realize what I'm saying to somebody. And they're usually like, "Why did you say that to me?"
Wow.
I'm like, "I don't know. It just came out." "Well, no, why did you say that to me?" And in these instances where it's like, why did you say that? There's always a synchronicity of something just happened, or information was just revealed, or a dream was had, or a vision. And this applies significantly that it's like a freak out moment. So what
So,
happened was this information just downloaded. And I feel like I'm just this walking vault of when this happens, this is going to unlock. And then you either know what to do, know what to say, or whatever.
so based on your ability to see that, right? See this data grid. Please correct me if I am not saying this correctly, but based how I'm picturing it in my head, your second NDE, how did that play out? What did you see before what did you see within the collective consciousness before your NDE and then your alignment with the person you're with now?
Okay, so let me back up before I had the surgery. I had the surgery, and like there was a bunch of things that played out with the day of the surgery. So it was a very particular day. Let me just move into a certain space because there's a few things that I definitely have to say, and then there's a bunch of details that won't really matter to what your question is. When I got wheeled into the surgical room, it was 9:42 turning 9:43. I watched the clock change as I was being wheeled backwards in. Before I had gotten there, I had known for about a week to 10 days that there's a chance that I would decide I wasn't going to come back. And I knew that I had the choice, and I didn't know what choice I was going to make. So for this week to 10 days beforehand, I couldn't say anything to anyone because it was very real to me that if I said anything to anyone, even remotely saying I have a choice whether I'm coming back or not, as soon as I give that information to someone, now we are co-creating. So
Right.
I'm not in charge anymore. I have now released part or all of that power to somebody else to co-create with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want people co-creating with me based off of their fears that I was going
Correct.
to leave
Wow.
if I wanted to stay.
Before
So
before you go forward, I just want to
yeah,
acknowledge that is a large weight to carry.
yes,
That's yes, and I it's beautiful that you can recognize that, but that's a lot to see and recognize before knowing you're moving into that space.
yeah. So it definitely takes some ability to harness and process through emotions very quickly and not act on emotions either, or act on any form of negative or self-limiting emotion that is in need of any kind of validation outside of yourself.
Right.
So that definitely was a huge acknowledgement of the work that I've done for myself.
Mhm.
And now the day that I left, I even had thought, oh, maybe I should, hug my daughter, this way, just in case. And immediately in my head, it was like, no, you just do your thing how you would normally do, regular hug, I'll be back, that kind of stuff. So when I went, I could feel different people feeling things
Mm.
when I talked to people. And it was just weird because I couldn't say anything either. And I'll get to that in a minute. So now I'm in this surgical room and they're preparing the table and, adjusting robot arms and stuff for the surgery. And all of a sudden I just went into that trance. And I remembered telepathically speaking to my friend, Sandy, that I said, remember these words. I have to come back. So that was me making the decision that, okay, I'm coming back. I have to come back. I have a lot of things that I need left to do in this world. So I need to come back. And then that was it. Lifted off and I was like, okay, moving over to the table now, and here we go. And then I remembered getting put out. And as soon as I was out, I was like out there. And I remembered it was almost like dominoes. It was so fast. That whole thing about having conversations with people, it was faster than what I experienced in the first NDE, but it was almost like a, hey, visiting, and like all this information was transferred in like a split second and onto the next person, the next person, the next person. And there were about 7 people that I visited. And every single one of those people after the surgery had said, I had this really weird feeling. I didn't know if you were coming back or not.
Oh, I just got chills.
Right?
Wow.
Every single one of those people. And now let's talk about Sandy.
Wow.
Sandy had called me afterwards and she's like, I don't know what you were doing. It was exactly 10:08, which I was in surgery. And she said, I felt your presence in my car because she was driving. And she said, I had this weird feeling that you were having a hard time figuring out whether you should be coming back or not. And I said, you get back there. You have a lot of unfinished business to do in this world. You need to get your ass back there. Right. And then she said, I felt you go. So then she was like, I was worried because I hadn't heard from you for hours and hours and hours. I was supposed to be in and out of there in the matter of a few hours. So I'll get to that too.
Wow.
And so after that had happened, then it was like this light burst of all of this stuff. And then after the light burst, or during the light burst, I should say, I felt connected with another person, another energy. And it was a familiar energy that went back to past life stuff. And I kept hearing myself saying, I came back for you. I came back for you. I came back for you. And in that, oh, here comes Tony. Hey, I came back for you too.
Hi, Tony.
So when that stuff happened, it was very familiar of a past life reconnection kind of thing. And I found out later, sorry, he's like messing with stuff. Like after my boyfriend and I were talking about some things, I realized that he had a near-death experience with a heart attack kind of thing, where he was gone at the same time. And all of the timestamps through my day and his day ended up aligning to the T. And when I was coming back, I remembered coming into my body and opening my eyes, and it was very labored, and the nurse was hovering over me basically and saying, Nicole, I need you to take a deep breath for me right now. So I just remembered going, and this shallow breath and having a hard time even doing that, and realizing that when I took that breath in, I was saying to myself, oh yeah, I wasn't breathing. And then I'd let the breath out, and then I'd be back out again. So I kept doing this, and it was like I couldn't come back until something was done.
You were like on the edge. You were like, you've made the decision, but you were teetering on this edge, this
Yep.
portal.
And then it was like 7 times. So there's that number again. 7 times I was coming back and seeing the same thing. I'd open my eyes, and the nurse would be like, Nicole, I need you to take a deep breath for me right now. So I'd do it. And then I'd say, oh yeah, I wasn't breathing. And then I'd let it out, and I'd be back out again until I got to the point where I was like, okay, I've got to come back in. Like, let me back in. Let me open your eyes. Keep your eyes. So I'm like yelling at myself and saying, like, you got to let me back in. Like, let me come back in. And the nurse was like, you know, you've been here way longer than anyone else has ever been here for the surgery.
Wow.
Like, it was kind of like, you gotta go, you know, like, get the heck out of here already. What is happening? And I was so messed up. Like, it just felt like I was so messed up that, like, the drugs weren't wearing off, or whatever the case was. It was, I was having such a hard time coming in. Then I finally got in, and I was struggling to stay there until it stabilized. And that was
Wow.
kind of the moments of, you know, when I came back in, my timestamp was the same time that he came back to life.
Wow. It was like you made the decision in your conscious mind, and then you went into this super conscious, unconscious realm during surgery where you're having conversations with people at light speed, you're meeting people from your past life, and then you've made the decision, but you're still teetering there, like you have to make the decision again to come
Yeah.
back. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, it's like so weird because, you know, whether it was, you know, they were having a hard time getting him back into his body or whatever it was, we both came back at the same time.
So you think you were holding on to help him?
Yeah, he was like, when we talked about it later and really kind of made the connection and the timestamps and everything, I remember him looking at me and just saying, you saved my life,
Wow.
because he didn't want to come back.
Does he have a recollection like you do of these events, like of his events and the decisions that he made, or is it through your experience that he's able to remember?
I think there are some, and that's one of the things that we really have to. We started to write some stuff down,
Mm-hmm.
because it's definitely a story that needs to be told from both
Mm-hmm.
angles.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's beautiful. I mean, it sounds like your understanding of the quantum is light speed now, right? Everything's slowed down in that first NDE, and then it's like, it's literally that fast.
yeah, and I think with him, there's definitely been some like dream work that has been
Hmm.
ignited and amplified with him, because it seems like he has dreams of past lives that I remember. So he
Oh,
has the
wow.
visual dream of the vision, like the third eye visions that I had of past lives where we were connected. So it's
And how
really
do you
interesting.
remember those past lives? Do they come through just as a vision, like the data
Yeah.
that you're seeing? And
Yeah, after my first NDE, that one in 2006, that was, I had tons of visions and of past lives and future stuff. So I just was keeping track of everything. So there was a lot of past life stuff that like things played out over and over and over again. And I'm like, how do I get this to stop? because it's almost like there's something that needs to happen and I need to know about this past life thing, and some of it didn't make sense and some of it, so it was this whole vision that was playing over and over and over again, and through people I had met as like a remembrance of this past life, but it's like, yeah, but you're not that person. But it's very similar. Something similar played out that would trigger me to remember the past life, that like there was this thing of twins and one of the twins could not be saved. And there was this, falling into, or, going into the river, and, the whole like hands like missing. And like he had this whole thing. I never told him about it. So when he's like, I had this really weird dream, and he's telling me this dream, and I'm like, no freaking way is this happening right now. He's like, what? I'm
Wow.
like, this is the past life thing that I was, saying that I've had this weird thing come up over and over and over again. And I had mentioned that, I was reminded of it in that light burst. The connection was there of this past life, but I never told him what that looked like. So he started saying it, and then I finished it, and he's like, get the frick out of here. And then he's like, wait, there are some details that I didn't tell you. I'm like, okay.
At that point where you're like, I know what you're going to say.
I know what you're going to say. Yeah. It's like so nuts. I know what you're going to say. Or,
so do you,
oh yeah, that was there. Yeah.
that's incredible.
That tree. Yeah. That.
So does he see, do you remember your NDE like a dream? Does he remember it in his dreams? Does that make sense?
That's a good question for him. So I don't know the answer. I don't know his
Okay, yeah.
answers to some of those questions.
Yeah.
For me, it feels like, it's dreamlike when you remember certain things because there's so much information that when in a dream you get so much, but to articulate what happened fully, we just don't have the words or the capacity to keep it in
It's
its
so
little separate
huge.
folders.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so big.
It's
We
so
can't
vast.
compartmentalize it into the English language, right?
Right. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like trying to describe a 3D object in 2D, like a circle.
Yes.
If you do a circle with another circle, circle, circle all the way within, I mean, technically you're describing a sphere, but you're not actually seeing a sphere. And if you don't know what 3D is and you're only two-dimensional, you can only speak in terms of two-dimension. Like we can only speak in terms of three-dimension. So in order for us to see something that's beyond that, we're only going to see it from a three-dimensional aspect. So we can't articulate what that actually looks like because we've expanded our consciousness for a temporary period of time to understand something that we can't bring back here.
Yes. That makes
So
sense.
it's only understandable out there when we're out of this. So
yeah, Nicole, you explained that so well. I mean, when you think about this is a foreign concept for a lot of people that have not experienced it, right? And trying to bridge the two worlds is
right.
often a challenge with words.
Right. So if you were a two-dimensional being and I came at you as a three-dimensional sphere, what you would see is a dot and then a bigger circle, a bigger circle, bigger circle, bigger circle, bigger
Yes.
circle, and bigger until it gets to the size of the sphere, and then go back to being a smaller circle, smaller, 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 smaller to a point.
That's our
That's what you would
perception
see.
is what you're saying, right?
Yeah. From a
Okay.
two-dimensional perception, you're only going to see those two-dimensional dot and circles, bigger, 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 smaller, 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 until it's gone. But that's not what a sphere looks like in 3D. So our ability to perceive what something is at a higher dimension, we're only able to perceive it at a 3D space, which is why it can be kind of scary or, whatever, because if you see something that is a higher dimensional being or energy or whatever you want to say, people are going to only put it in a context that they can understand.
That they know, yes. That's really important.
Yeah.
So how death is a doorway for a lot of people, but death is also the end for some people. The end. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end to this life, and that's it. Based on what you've experienced in your near-death experiences, what do you know to be true about an afterlife?
Okay, so I have to say this, that I believe that, so when I came back in the gasp, and beyond that, there were a lot of things that happened that were really hard to understand, because things I remembered very differently from my family, my kids. So there were different things that I remembered in different places that weren't there, or there was a lot of different scenarios that I remembered in a different way than other people did. So that was indicative of time jumping or dimension jumping. When I was trying to put the pieces together and I found out about walk-ins, how walk-ins were described, I thought I was a walk-in, but then I realized, no, I actually jumped dimensions and I died in that other dimension. So my consciousness shifted to a new dimension. So in that other space, I'm dead. My kids are all alone, but yet, because we have no time and space like the way in the universal concept, I can think about my kids and give them support and love and messages. And that might be coming through in some way through a medium or a delivery of, something symbolic of me or experiences that we've had together. It could come in any of those ways at any point in their life, because there is no time. So since I realized that, I've always, put that energy to giving more messages, which I think is why some people get more messages from certain loved ones than others do, because their consciousness in wherever they're at has to also understand that and then consciously project that.
That's beautiful.
So it's our energy, because science, it's all science. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. It just gets transferred or transmuted. So where does it go? So maybe there's a potential that, okay, so in that dimension, that consciousness moves over to another consciousness of Nicole
Mm-hmm.
and helps to enhance that timeline. While the other timeline can play out what it wants, because guess what? In that timeline, Nicole wanted to die. So she got what she wanted, what she manifested, what she created.
Wow. So you do believe at some point in time in both of your NDEs that you did die? Do you believe you quantum jumped in your recent one? Or did you, because it sounds
That's
like
a
you
good
made a
question.
conscious, it sounds like you made a conscious decision to stay.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
It's okay not to know, right?
Because it's almost like that, coming back to this reality, there were things that were catapulted in one area, but I don't know about the discrepancies though. So I watch for the discrepancies of things that happen. So I think maybe I didn't die and it did decide to come back, and it all worked out that way. Because there was stuff that was left to do. But who knows?
I'm curious, this is a thought for you as you process this, not necessarily one you have to answer. When you were talking about, you knew you would have the choice whether you were going to leave or not in the most recent NDE. That was made from your conscious mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it wasn't, I'm assuming.
I think it was both. I think there was almost like, I think there was almost like this, because it was like I just automatically went into this trance and was saying to my friends, like, remember these words, like you're gonna have to tell me this. You remember these words. I have to come back. So I literally sat there going, well, I guess I made my decision. So whether that was conscious or subconscious.
When
maybe
you
both.
were in the 10 days prior to your surgery, and you
Yeah,
said you knew that you were going to have to make this decision, and then having that conversation with anybody else would be in co-creation with probably their highest fear, right?
yeah.
Which is never where we want to meet people at, right?
Nope.
But were you in co-creation with yourself making that? I think we always are in co-creation with ourselves, whether that's for our hopefully for our highest, best interest. But I'm curious, were you in
Yeah.
co-creation with yourself in your conscious mind
I
or
think
at your
now that you ask
superconscious?
the question, I
Yeah.
feel like the answer to that is yes. And
Mhm.
I think the extension of that yes is because I was able to stay in a space of growth
Mhm.
and being consciously aware of my thoughts and my feelings and how I felt about it, because I could stay outside of any negative emotional rilings. That it
Yes.
was like that whole thing about accepting what does or what doesn't happen.
And that is really where the magic happens. I mean, I know why you have magic in your name, right? I mean, that is truly what this is about.
Yeah,
Co-creating with ourselves to create what we want in our lives.
right.
That
Exactly.
is beautiful. I want to end somewhere to leave people thinking about something. Um, because ever since you said this, I'm now really curious. And it's about disclosure. With your identified golden brain and you being identified as gifted as a kid, do you believe that there is some sort of connection to other races? Do you believe you're tapped into the disclosure of whatever, the connection to other races based on your gifted
Yes.
status? And that is why you're so heavily tested. Your brain was so heavily tested. Um,
Yes.
okay,
I've
as a
seen
young child.
I've seen different beings through my life, including a different surgery I had like way back in, I don't know, 2010 maybe. I saw one of the mantis beings
Really?
as I was getting knocked out. I saw this mantis being, and that mantis being I've only seen a handful in my entire life of times. And um he had shown up, I'll just say he, but whatever. He had shown up um during like a healing thing. So when he showed up at the start of this surgery, when I was going out, I literally said, telepathically, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "I'm here to protect you." And I was like,
Oh,
"Protect me from what?" And I was out. And then when I
okay.
came to, I had one nurse coming up on the side of me to the nurse behind me, and the nurse was like, "What the heck happened in there?" Now, I was conscious, but I couldn't move. So I was like paralyzed from, I wasn't fully awake yet. So I
Hmm.
could just hear what was going on, and I couldn't respond. I couldn't like move. I couldn't speak. And it was just like, oh, difficult ligation. There was blood everywhere, blah, blah,
Oh,
blah.
wow.
And I'm sitting there thinking, are they talking about me? And then I realized, yeah, I was the only one scheduled for that day.
Oh,
And
my.
then, and then all of a sudden I started coming to, and I had this shooting pain all the way down my left leg. And I was like, ah, and she's like, oh, you're okay, And I said, why is there so much pain in my leg? And I'm like trying to grab at it. And she's like, oh, it was probably the position that the doctor had you in. And I
Hmm.
said, well, I don't know what that means, because this was a laparoscopic surgery. There is no positioning. And then she's like, oh, you're in pain. And she bumps me with the morphine. So I was like out again, like loopy.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, I can't get any questions answered. And then they were upset that I was so messed up that I couldn't leave right away. So it was really interesting, because I mean, there's a little bit more details in there, but that's the gist of it. Is
Wow.
okay, so we don't want to answer the question of, oh, Maybe she didn't expect me to have my wits to me when I was
Wow.
waking up. I don't know.
I'm certainly curious. I'd love to talk to you about that on another episode maybe, but about
Yeah.
your brain and what our other races see in your brain.
Hmm.
I know that's way out there,
It
but I'm
could
curious
be,
about it.
we could look at it maybe as a way of, sometimes, okay, for all of you OLD people out there like me, um, there's AM radio, FM radio, then
Yeah.
there's the AM FM, and then there's
Yes.
it's almost like, well, what is your capability of tuning into?
Yes.
So, I mean, people could have a narrow scope or a very wide scope. And I think
Yeah.
that's really what it comes down to is what's your radio picking up?
Yeah, that's a great way to end this. I think that's so important, right? Whether or not to get so we don't get too in the weeds with specific things, but I
Yeah,
think that it's an important piece to recognize. So thank you for that, Nicole.
you're welcome.
I always like to end our discussions. Thank you for this beautiful discussion. It's been so eye-opening, and I've loved getting to hear your stories. So, and I
Thank
know
you.
our audience will too. So I love to end with what is your grounded guidance for our community? So, what is your special, unique wisdom that you would like to leave our community with?
That's a great question. And where I always begin is what is it that you truly want? Right, when I work with my clients, it's really getting that clarity around what is it that you truly desire. So define your desire and what you truly, truly want, devoid of anybody else's expectations of you or what you think your responsibilities are. What do you truly want? And when you look at what you want, coupled with the values that you hold, and then look at where those gaps in your reality right now, that's the compass to which is going to unlock all of the success. So that's where I begin. And it seems a lot harder than me saying that because you're operating from subconscious patterns. So it takes a few little phases of understanding and unlocking your brain to see things a certain way. So if you can start asking yourself those questions, you'll start revealing new things to yourself. And it's all about understanding who you are to get where you're going.
Thank you, Nicole.
You're welcome, Karen. This has been such a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today on the Grounded Guidance podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to our podcast and leaving a review. Your feedback helps us reach more curious minds like yours. Until next time, stay grounded, stay guided, and keep stretching your edges to think differently. Take care, my friends.